Morant with a running start. Elevate! Oh, it dunks! Oh, my goodness!
Tie game in overtime. Gasol will turn. His heat is gone! Memphis on top. 7-10 remaining. Conley now with three. Count it! A 15-point lead for Memphis. And Blake Griffin gets into it on the floor with Randolph. Hard to tell if there are any punches being thrown under there, but Griffin took acceptance.
Adams going long. Morant! He hit it! John Morant, insanity!
You gotta be kidding me.
Welcome to Grits and Grinds, a Memphis Grizzlies podcast. Ziaire Williams is gone edition. My name is Keith Parrish. The trade we've been expecting for a really long time now, that I have forecasted many times, finally occurred. The Grizzlies did indeed salary dump Ziaire Williams, a not spectacular end to Ziaire Williams' career on the Grizzlies, the 10th pick of the 2021 draft, gets sent to Brooklyn. The Grizzlies attached a 2030 second-round pick to make this happen. The Grizzlies got back the draft rights to some 31-year-old in Serbia, and they also got back Mamadi Diakite from the Nets. Diakite's salary is not fully guaranteed. You can go ahead and, I think, write it in pen that he will be waived, and thus the Grizzlies will only owe $800,000 of his salary. So this move saves the Grizzlies $5 million about in salary for this upcoming season. It moves them now $11 million away from the luxury tax line. This move was done to re-sign Luke Kennard. Now, the Luke Kennard signing might happen before I even get this out to you, but that's everything that's been happening. It's what we expected to happen. It's what I've told you was going to happen. So this finally occurred. The Grizzlies right now move $11 million away from the luxury tax line. They have 13 guys under contract. 14 if you count Diakite. I am not counting him. He's been waived to save a few more $100,000 or whatever. And thus, the Grizzlies now have some wiggle room under the luxury tax line. I don't love this move. I've been adamant about it. I thought the Grizzlies this year, in a year you have Jaren Ja, Desmond all under contract, where you have Marcus Smart, in his age 30 season, I feel like this is more or less an all-in year. This is not a year to try to save your owner money. This is not really a year where you worry about starting the clock for the repeater tax. I see so many people defending this move or supporting this move based on the repeater tax. I've talked about this in other episodes. I talked about it on an episode I just released like an hour or two ago on Friday. The repeater tax happens. These are financial penalties. Again, these do not hurt you, listener, unless you're Robert Parra. These are financial penalties for our billionaire owner. And those penalties get difficult when you go into the luxury tax 3 years out of a 4-year span. I don't see the Grizzlies ever doing that. Even if they re-sign Jaren Jackson Jr., and the only way I will allow an argument that this is a good move this year is if you are confident that Jaren Jackson Jr. is coming back in 2 years. Like, Jaren Jackson Jr. is going to be an unrestricted free agent in 2026. If you know Jaren is coming back, okay, fine, I'll accept your argument. Maybe we should be paying attention to the repeater tax. But even if Jaren Jackson Jr. comes back and you pay him a max salary, which is going to be a ridiculously high number, I still don't think the Grizzlies are going to have that much trouble dodging the luxury tax. The luxury tax goes up. Next season, the luxury tax line is $187 million. Right now, the Grizzlies have 11 guys under contract for next year, and they have about $157 million in salaries already committed. So that's $30 million in room under the luxury tax line for next year. This is with keeping Jaren, Ja, Desmond, with having Marcus Smart and Brandon Clark, still having John Conchar on the books. Like, your top 11 from this year, next year, is still going to be $30 million under the luxury tax line. I don't feel like it's going to be a problem avoiding the luxury tax next year. The following season, that would be 2026, when you need to pay Jaren Jackson Jr. That season, the luxury tax line goes up to $207 million. Marcus Smart comes off your books then. So does Brandon Clark. I don't feel like it's going to be a problem. I'll frankly be surprised if the Grizzlies pay luxury tax any of the next 2 seasons or 3 seasons. I'm going to be surprised that they've ever paid luxury tax. This was the year to pay luxury tax. The Grizzlies got lucky, remember, with Ja Morant's extension. He did not make a supermax because of his off-the-court stuff. They got lucky with Jaren Jackson Jr.'s extension because he was injured when he signed it. Those guys are under market value right now. The Grizzlies basically right now are lucky to be under the luxury tax because of things they did not control. Maybe you say they controlled like the Jaren thing, like the Ja thing, that was out of their hands. They are set up right now to spend money to be competitive this year, in my mind. Now, if you say there's a competitive reason because you free up a roster spot, that's legitimate. All right, we have 13 players. If they re-sign Luke, that'll be 14 players. You have another roster spot. I'm not saying it's a bad move for the Grizzlies because like I'm going to miss Ziaire Williams. Clearly, Ziaire Williams had been passed in the depth chart by Gigi Jackson and by Vince Williams Jr. and by Jake LaRavia even. Like Ziaire, the player, had fallen out of the rotation, and with him being in the last year of his deal, you understood they weren't going to bring him back. They're not signing him to a new contract. So I'm not upset about losing Ziaire Williams, the player. Not at all. Just paying to get rid of him when I'm not sure what we're going to add to get under the luxury tax to save our owner money, I don't love that part of it. Like you could have kept Luke Kennard and kept Ziaire Williams. And then also you could have traded Ziaire Williams, used his salary as matching salary in a future trade. You now can no longer do that. If you're saying this gives the Grizzlies more flexibility to make moves, sort of. It gives you more flexibility to make certain moves, but not other moves. It gives you less flexibility to make some trades. They're not coming up to the first apron. Right now, they're about $19 million from the first apron. So $11 million from the luxury tax line before a Luke Kennard contract and $19 million away from the first apron. They could theoretically, to the best of my knowledge, now use the Steven Adams traded player exception or like the MLE. But of course, for the MLE, everyone's gone. All the free agents, they're gone. There's no more people to sign unless you want to bring like Tyus Jones. But the thing is, once you re-sign Luke Kennard, well, then that chops into your space under the first apron. If you re-sign Luke Kennard for like $9 million, well, then you're just $9 million from the first apron. That's the maximum you could use as far as the trade exception or for your mid-level exception. You'd be hard kept to the first apron. So you can't really use those things once you re-sign Luke Kennard. Also, you're telling me they're going to go into the luxury tax? They're not going into the luxury tax. And by the way, many of you are telling me it's good they're not going into the luxury tax. So it doesn't actually free them up to do much of anything. If Luke Kennard signs for like $6 or $7 million and gives you a little bit of wiggle room to add another player to stay under the luxury tax, okay. So then we get a 15th guy. Who's that going to be? Are we talking about signing a minimum big? Because again, $11 million from the luxury tax. If you add a guy on a minimum, you don't have that much money to pay Luke Kennard. So my fear is they're not even going to use the 15th roster spot. I mean, maybe they would, but they would still probably need to free up more salary some way. If that's Santi Aldama or John Conchar or some other kind of move, like they need to free up more money to stay under the luxury tax, which is, again, my issue. If you're trying to win basketball games this year, it seems like you're not really going as hard as you can by maximizing your roster around your best players. Now, I'm not saying to ignore the future. I'm not saying not to pay attention to what moves you can make in the future due to your salary, but I don't see the path to improving greatly with these parameters you've set up, these self-imposed parameters, which is what the luxury tax line is. So, I mean, maybe, again, best case scenario, re-sign Luke Kennard. You still have room for like adding a minimum guy. You add a minimum big or something. And then that is good enough for your team this year. But you kind of lost some ability for making a big splash of a trade. Because previously, at the very least, we could have packaged together, like if you kept Luke Kennard, You could have at least used Luke Kennard's salary plus Ziaire Williams' salary, maybe to bring in a guy making 15, 20 million or something. But now you really can't. And of course, you were always going to be capped probably that first apron. So, like, I'm not excited about it. I'm more accepting of the fact that, okay, it looks like we're going to try to be the best team we can possibly be, but while not paying the luxury tax. And like the financial benefit to the team, to the franchise, it is big. Like, not only do you not have to pay luxury tax, you actually receive the distribution of other people's luxury tax, but that is just for like the organization. I reap zero benefits of that. The Grizzlies give me no money for that. I don't think they give anyone money for that. Season ticket holders, I don't think you're getting a break based on that occurring. So my dreams of the offseason, and I still would maintain everyone's dreams of the offseason before the offseason started, was to add multiple good players in addition to drafting somebody with the 9th pick. Even the people who desperately wanted the Grizzlies to get Zach Edey with the 9th pick, they thought, and let's also add another good player, or let's trade Ziaire or Santi for something good. And I think you have to be honest and say we didn't do any of those things. We brought back Luke. We salary dumped Ziaire to save money. And that's our team. And I think it's a little bit disappointing, but I guess it's okay if you disagree with me. And again, I always like to throw the caveat out there. Perhaps I'm missing something. But right now, it just looks like we're making sure we're under the luxury tax no matter what. And maybe this coming off season or at the trade deadline, maybe we're able to package, I don't know, we're able to package like Marcus Smart or something. Like maybe that doesn't work out. Or maybe we've decided, you know what, we're going to move off Brandon Clark. Zach Edey is so good. He's going to play 30 minutes a game. Jaren's going to play 30, 35 minutes a game. We don't really need that 6th big. We can trade Brandon Clark in his contract plus Luke Kennard for whatever he's signed to. We can package that together, bring in a guy who's making a ton of money for the next few seasons. And then when we re-sign Jaren, we're actually going to be in the luxury tax. And thus it will be great that we paid to get rid of Ziaire Williams back in 2024. But I feel like those things are unlikely. It doesn't seem like the most probable outcome. And if there's any risk of Jaren leaving, again, if there's like a 30% chance Jaren wants to go to some big market and pursue his fashion career in addition to playing for a franchise that's willing to spend, like if there's any kind of risk that Jaren might leave in free agency, well, then you've not maximized one of the remaining years he'll be here. You don't have to have that worry, but that's what I worry about. So that's why I don't love it. I mean, salary dumps by definition, they're just done to save money. They're not made to get better. There are probably a few exceptions out there where you're like, oh, this team's salary dumped for this reason and it worked out really great for them. I mean, the Denver Nuggets, they've been salary dumping guys for years and they won a title, but also they have Nikola Jokic. And I would also argue they won a title despite their front office salary dumping players for years. So, I don't know. Ziaire didn't pan out. I mean, there's no reason to cry, I guess, over the spilled milk there. That was the 10th pick in the draft. Also, like they chose years ago, they chose for their wings Dillon Brooks and Ziaire Williams. And those guys ended up walking for negative value, technically. So, anyways, thus concludes the Ziaire Williams emergency episode. Again, this is no reflection on Luke Kennard. I would rather keep Luke Kennard than lose him. But we're not adding more better players yet. We just keep losing players and we're not replacing them. And it is actually difficult to add more players now, as opposed to like there's some freedom now that we've decided to move on from this deal. Also, I saw like Matt Hardlicka has his Patreon where he writes about the Grizzlies. He made a good argument that the Grizzlies just should have stretched Ziaire's contract. That way you hang on to your 2nd round pick. I mean, the Grizzlies are not flush with 2nd round picks anymore. They sent them out basically in the last couple of years. They did it for those pick swaps with the Suns, which have low odds of reaping any benefits. So I don't know. I'm excited about the Grizzlies. the Grizzlies Summer League has been great. The Grizzlies roster, when healthy, is really, really good. The thing I keep repeating over and over and over, the dead horse I keep beating is yes, we're good, but I want to maximize the roster up and down the roster. I want to make it as good as possible to try to capitalize on these next 2 seasons where I think our competitive window might be at its peak. The Grizzlies, when fully healthy right now, have an awesome rotation. They have an awesome group of 8 guys I'm very confident in. Maybe stretch it to 9, but let's not get carried away. Ja and Jaren and Dez and Marcus and Zach Edey and Vince Williams Jr. and Gigi Jackson and Brandon Clark, I'm ready to go with those guys. I think there are other good contributors on the roster. I think Luke Kennard can be a good contributor to the roster. But I still feel like there were avenues. When you look at the players who signed in free agency, you look at some of the guys who signed for cheap in free agency, you look at the useful 3 and D players, guys who could come in and play the 3 or the 4. You look at some of the centers who signed, guys who could fill in times Zach Edey has a twisted ankle, times Jaren Jackson Jr. is in foul trouble. Those guys were all there for taking. Meanwhile, it feels like we spent our entire summer worried about how we weren't going to go into the luxury tax for the first time of this era. And that bugs me. But it doesn't have to bug you. Maybe you believe that it's very important to save Robert Parra money. Maybe you think that luxury tax thing is going to be a big deal. The repeater tax thing is going to be a big deal. We're going to have some kind of $250 million salary. That's up, $80 million from where we are right now. You think that's happening in 2 years? And I don't know which player's getting all that money. Maybe the next Vince Williams Jr. contract is going to be a max. We'll see. I mean, some people may be pointing out the 15th roster spot you could use to convert Scottie Pippen Jr. to a regular salary, put him on the main roster. Also, this keeps going back to the thing where people try to tell me that something we already have is something we're getting. It's like, oh yeah, we can create a roster spot to add Scottie Pippen Jr. to the roster. We already have Scottie Pippen Jr. Getting rid of Ziaire helps us add more good players like Luke Kennard. We already have Luke Kennard. We're not adding players. We're keeping players. I want more good players. Players that aren't already here. Maybe to retain Scottie Pippen Jr. near the end of the year, you would want to add him to a regular roster spot. Give him a salary akin to what happened with Kenneth Lofton Jr. and what happened with Vince Williams Jr. and Gigi Jackson. Okay. Maybe that's a path you need to go, but I don't know how important that is because you know what? We already have Ja Morant. Ja Morant's our guy. If Ja Morant isn't good to go, well, then we have bigger problems that Scottie Pippen Jr. is not going to solve. I don't need Cam Spencer to have a regular roster spot this year. That makes no sense to me. I don't have any need to, promote Scottie Pippen Jr. I need guys who can play in the first round of the playoffs, playoffs, right now. Maybe they're not out there, but that's where I don't totally understand, or that's where I'm still not as excited about the idea of maybe adding that extra roster spot because I see limited avenues for them to actually bring in someone who matters in that open roster spot. Anyways, thanks everybody as always for being a Grits and Grinds listener. I'm sure we'll have breaking news for Luke Kennard any moment now. And I'm certain that 15th player who's really going to change the game is coming in any moment. Anyways, y'all have a great one. I'll talk to you soon. Go Grizz.